What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the world according to Briggs. Today's video is part 2 of our abandoned series. This series has to do with places in America that were once filled with life and opportunity and now sit like a monument to someone's failure, like I said in the last video. Most of the time, but not all the time, the reason these locations became abandoned is man-made. Someone made a business error and the place got shut down, people lost jobs, and now the building is crumbling. Humans are always interested in abandoned buildings and ruins. We need to know the story behind it. What happened here? Why is nobody in this building? Sometimes the interest is because you've been to that location or you've heard about it. Maybe it's an area you grew up in. In honor of our fascination with places that have been left behind, I give you part 2 of the Abandoned series. Enjoy. Number 5, Concrete City, Pennsylvania. Concrete City was built in 1911 as company housing for employees of the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad's coal division in Nanticoke, Pennsylvania. It was eventually taken over by the Glen Alden Coal Company, who, after being told what it would take to bring these houses up to code, they became very uninterested in paying for the required improvements. They thought about demolishing it, but it was too well built and not worth the effort to take it down. That effort may have had to include dynamite and bulldozers. So they abandoned the property in 1924. It's still there to this day in that Mad Max end-of-the-world style condition. These days, though, it still gets a lot of use. The site is commonly used by the military, the police and firefighters, homeless, runaways, drug users, and for some dude that likes to spray paint, "My name is Ted" on things. No kidding, some dude just spray paints "My name is Ted" everywhere. They also get a lot of airsoft and paintball events here. No word if Ted's a paintballer. Back in the early 1900s, the rent on each house was $8 a month, and each had 7 rooms. Unfortunately, the concrete walls frequently dripped with condensation, and clothing often froze in their closets during the winter months. At that point, you might just want to buy a tent and save the $8. Now, if you could find rent these days for $8 a month, I would encourage you to pay it, buy a couple heaters, and deal with a frozen frickin' jacket. If you decide you want to move here, you better like graffiti and YouTubers flying drones around. I've never been there, so I don't have any drone footage, but there's plenty on YouTube. And I notice each YouTuber that goes there acts like they just uncovered some lost city. They get all into it like they just discovered a Mayan temple, a couple miles outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania. Next time I fly into Pennsylvania, I'll head there. It's not too far from the airport. I'll put the drone up. Number 4, Fort Jefferson, Florida. Located about 70 miles west of Key West, sits the largest masonry structure in the Western Hemisphere. Now, this one isn't as much abandoned as the other entries on this list, but for a long time it was, and it has some serious history, so we're going to push on with it. About 5 years after Spain sold Florida to the United States for a whopping $5 million, the U.S. Navy was looking for a site for a naval station that would help suppress piracy in the Caribbean. Yes, at one point, the United States had a problem with the Pirates of the Caribbean, or Caribbean, whichever you prefer. Some years later, Disney made them fun and lovable. The Navy found just what they were looking for in a place called Garden Key. The construction of Fort Jefferson finally began on Garden Key in December of 1846. At the onset of the Civil War, 62 men from the 2nd Artillery Regiment were moved to the fort to prevent it from falling into the hands of rebel forces. The fort had a population at the time of about 168 personnel, which included women and children. At some point, someone decided it would be a great place for military prisoners like mutineers and deserters. In September of 1861, the first prisoners were brought to the fort and placed in the dungeon. How cool is that? They have a dungeon. No dragons, I checked. President Lincoln substituted imprisonment at Fort Jefferson instead of execution. That's the normal punishment for desertion. During wartime, it's death. It always has been. On 24 July 1865, 4 special civilian prisoners arrived at the fort. These were Samuel Mudd, Edmund Spangler, Samuel Arnold, and Michael O'Laughlin, who had been convicted of conspiracy in the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. Not too long after the Civil War, the fort was abandoned. Neglected, vandalized, and repeatedly hit by tropical storms led to Fort Jefferson rapidly deteriorating. It remained unoccupied until war with Spain broke out in 1898. In 1902, the property was transferred to the Department of the Navy. In 1906, the fort again was abandoned. Until 1934, Garden Key and the crumbling ruins were merely a rendezvous for fishermen and tourists. Kind of an oddity in the middle of the sea. It is now in a national park and is a protected historical site. Number 3, River Country, Walt Disney World, Lake Buena Vista, Florida. Sitting on the shores of Bay Lake near Discovery Island was river country. With its rustic wilderness theme, it was described as an old-fashioned swimming hole that costs an arm and an eyeball to get into in true Disney fashion. Here's a fun fact. Last week, they found a homeless gentleman living on the abandoned Discovery Island right across from the old river country site. I guess he decided this was some free real estate and he swam out there to self-quarantine. Disney's wilderness-themed water park operated from 1976 until 2001, and it's actually one of multiple abandoned theme parks on the Walt Disney World property. I could do a couple videos on abandoned Disney alone. If you want to see something like that, leave a comment down below or click in that little white circle at the top right. It's there right now. River Country was Walt Disney World's first water park. The park resembled Tom Sawyer's Island with rope swings, a swimming hole, flume rides, and a natural sandy beach for the guests. River Country first closed at the end of the warm season in 2001 and then didn't open in 2002, 2003, and finally in 2005, Disney announced that it was never going to open again. They never gave a reason for the closing, but most fans speculate it was the safety concerns. They'd had some accidents over the years and they figured it was going to go away at some point anyway. It was sort of a lame water park from what I understand. The slides were kind of weak, and you had to stand in line for like 45 minutes to get on a lame slide. That's never a good time, especially if you got kids and they're getting sunburned, lotioning your kids up 3 times before they get on the water slide. On March 5th, 2018, Disney filed permits for a new mystery development labeled Project 89. It's always some mystery thing with these people. A resort was confirmed on the River Country location on May 31st, 2018, and most of the remaining structures of that River Country park, including the remnants of the upstream plunge pool, were demolished on April 20th, 2019. Some of the structures are still visible, and Discovery Island is still abandoned, unless another castaway swims out there to the island to set up camp on. Number 2, the Tillamook Rock Lighthouse, Oregon coast. Nicknamed Terrible Tilly, this lighthouse off the coast of Oregon was in operation from 1881 until 1957. If you're looking for it on the map, it's north of the city of Tillamook, or the town, between Seaside and Cannon Beach, Oregon. The light was officially lit on January 21st, 1881. At the time, it was the most expensive West Coast lighthouse ever built. It was a normal lighthouse, but the costs, in part, were driven up by weather conditions and the dangerous commute for both keepers and suppliers to the lighthouse. And that's how the lighthouse got its nickname, Terrible Tilly. Within weeks of the lighthouse opening, a ship sailed too close to shore because of low visibility and crashed into the rocks, killing 17 crew members. When the Tillamook Lighthouse was in operation, conditions for workers were notoriously rough, and one lighthouse keeper actually went insane. That's always good. Before work even began, a master mason surveying the location was swept out to sea, never to be seen again. They don't know what happened to him. They know he hit the water. That was it. More than a few thrill seekers have been lost or needed to be rescued trying to reach the lighthouse over the years. Decades after the lighthouse was decommissioned in 1957, it was turned into a storehouse for urns of cremated sailors. To this day, the remains of 30 people are still stored in the lighthouse. That one's kind of spooky. I've seen this lighthouse. It's out there, and I just don't know why it hasn't fallen apart and fallen into the sea. I mean, it was built in the 1800s, and it still looks pretty sturdy to this day. It's weird. It's kind of eerie looking at it, because there's a point, if you go for a hike, where you could see it from the cliffs. It's just kind of strange. Especially when you find out there's like the remains of 30 people out there on this rock. And number 1, North Brother Island, New York City. North Brother Island is just off the shore of New York City near Hunts Point and Rikers Island, kind of in between them. And it's a rare patch of land that is abandoned. This in the New York City area is very rare. Every inch is put to use. According to a friend of mine who's a Mets fan, he said, except wherever the Mets are playing. Anyway, moving on. It wasn't always abandoned. The 22-acre island was initially inhabited in 1885 for the purpose of building a hospital for patients with typhoid fever, tuberculosis, yellow fever, and smallpox. They quarantined people out here. The Riverside Hospital was home to Typhoid Mary after she infected at least 25 people from 1910 to 1915. She was sent to the island and was quarantined the rest of her life. In the early 1900s, a steamship caught fire in the East River just south of the island. Around 1,000 people died, with most of them washing up on the shore of North Brother Island. So the place has some history, and it's almost like it's cursed. It's weird. After World War II, the hospital was reopened as a rehabilitation center for drug addicts. In 1963, North Brother Island shut its doors for good. These days, the island is off limits, and nature is slowly reclaiming the buildings. Now, I've read about this one before, and I'm amazed that this piece of real estate has never been developed. I know it's got some history, and I know it's kind of weird, but this is just a prime piece of real estate in New York City, just sitting there untouched, relatively untouched. It's always been strange to me. Alright, so that's our list. That was part 2 of Abandoned America. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Now, this one took a weird turn because I had 3 good ones set for the end. Better than I think the ones we had here. But as I researched them and got deeper into them, it was hospitals where a lot of people were lost, suspected, killed, and a lot of abuse went on there. And I just didn't want, to be telling you about things that would put that thought in your head, so I left it alone. Anyway, don't forget all the links below. Give the video a big thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe if you like what we're doing here. Everybody have a great day. Be nice to each other.